Grade 12 Economics. Please welcome Mr. Mhlomo. I'm back here with you today. We are continuing with our economics, macroeconomics, but today we are switching to the topic by the name of public sector. So this topic will be covered the whole of it today. We won't be breaking it like we did in the business cycle. So we'll cover it all today. So please join me. Subtopic are as follows under public sector: the composition, the necessity, objectives, budget, fiscal policy, as well as the public sector failure. I'm Mr. Mhlomo. Please join me. Let's see what I have in the pocket for you. So the following are the lesson objectives that will be achieved during the course of this lesson. After this lesson, you will be able to discuss macroeconomic objectives or public sector objectives in details. It's an essay. It's a part of section C questions. You will be able to use Laffer curve to explain the relationship between tax rates and tax revenues. You will be able to differentiate between the main budget, medium-term expenditure framework, as well as medium-term budget policy statement. You will also be able to briefly discuss reasons for poor public sector provisioning, and also you'll be able to discuss reasons for public sector failure in detail. That's an essay also. It is believed that you already know the following information based on the public sector that was covered in grade 10. The composition of the public sector, the necessity of the public sector. So the following are the basic concepts that will assist you to understand this lesson. Firstly, we have economic growth, which is believed to be the increase in productive capacity of the country, or the increase in economic activity of the country, or the increase in real GDP of the country. Economic equity, the economy that has less income gaps between the country's citizens, meaning this is the economy that shows less income gap between the rich and the poor. Price stability refers to prices that do not increase and decrease over time. Exchange rate is the currency of the currency of one country in relation to another country's currency. We continue with the terminology. Full employment occurs when all economically active population that have been active looking for jobs are employed or are able to find a job. The budget. It is a document with expected income and projected expenditure for a certain financial period. Medium-term expenditure framework is the income and expenditure estimation over a period of 3-year rolling. Medium-term budget policy statement is the budget which reviews changes that have occurred in the main budget since February at the beginning of the new financial year, but we can also say since February or since April. So remember, our financial year begins at on the 1st of April, but our budget is presented on the last week of February every year. We continue with the terminology. The budget deficit occurs when the state used state debts to finance its budget. Inflation target at the range in which inflation should float within. Tax evasion, the illegal practice that occurs when taxpayers hide their source of income. So that's when they do not disclose their source of income with SARS. Laffer curve, the curve that illustrates or explains the relationship between tax rate and tax revenues. Tax revenues, the income collected by the government through tax or taxation. So this is the point of our lesson. We have the composition of the public sector, where we'll be explaining the spheres of the public sector from national, provincial, and local, and then also explaining the parastatals or public corporations as a part of the public sector. The necessity, why the public sector is important, which is all about to provide public goods and services, to manage the economy, and also to conserve resources. Factors contributing to poor public sector provision, which are also known as reasons for poor public sector provision. That's why we talk about the likes of efficiencies, accountability, assessing needs, privatization, pricing policy, as well as parastatals. Public sector objectives will also be discussed as an essay. Remember, it's a part of Section C. That's where we discuss in detail economic growth, full employment, price stability, economic equity, and exchange rate stability or balance of payment equilibrium. We will talk about budgets, which include the main budget or the national budget that informs the provincial budget and also a municipal budget. We'll also talk about the medium-term budget policy statement, MTPPS. We'll also discuss medium-term expenditure framework, MTEF. We will discuss fiscal policy. So it will break fiscal policy in detail so that we can have a pure understanding of the fiscal policy that we were talking about back then on our previous chapter or previous topic of the business cycle. You will be able to illustrate the Laffer curve and explain the relationship between the tax rate and tax revenues. We will discuss reasons for public sector failure in detail as an essay. This is a Section C question. And then we'll also be able to discuss or explain briefly effects of public sector failure. After the public sector has failed, what are the effects in there, which include economic effect, social effect, environmental effects. So here we break it down now. What is meant by the public sector? What is the public sector? So we say public sector is a portion of the economy composed of all levels of the government and state-owned enterprises. So if we talk about all levels of the government, we mean the national or central government, we mean the provincial government, or we also mean the local government, including state-owned enterprises or public corporations. Levels of the public sector include central government, provincial government, and local government. Central government focuses on national issues such as national defense and international relations. That is the main duty of the national or central government. And then the provincial government is concerned with provincial issues that include housing, healthcare, as well as education. So these are the main duties of the provincial government. And then local government is concerned with issues such as electricity supply, municipal roads maintenance, traffic control, refuse removal, water supply, etc. These are some duties of the local or municipal government or regional government. So how is the public sector composed? Then we talk about the national government, which we have already mentioned that it deals with issues like international relations as well as defense force. And then the provincial government, this is the government that deals with issues like the provision of housing, healthcare services, education, etc. And then local government, this is the government that deals with issues like the provision of water, electricity, refuse removal, etc. We talk about public corporations, which include our state-owned enterprises such as Eskom, TENET, as well as Transnet. So the national government being explained. So that part of the public sector that is responsible for the overall running of the country. The government is controlled by the political party that wins the most of votes during the election. Central government consists of various management departments, government departments which are responsible for developing national policy, making legislation, and coordinating services across all 9 provinces. Central government is managed by the president, the cabinet, ministers, and members of the parliament. The central government focuses on national issues such as national defense and our external relationship with the rest of the world, which is known as international relations. It also includes public services organizations such as the Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, CSIR, and also Bureau of Standards, SAPS, as well as a large number of commissions such as Human Rights Commission and the Competition Board. The provincial government, that part of the public sector that deals with economic issues specific to the given region or a province. There are 9 provinces, provincial governments. Each one draws up a plan for developing the economy of the province and improving services. Provincial government is managed by the premiers and MECs, members of the executive committee. Provincial government is mainly concerned with regional issues such as housing, healthcare services, as well as the educational services. Then the local governance, that part of the public sector that deals with local issues within a town or municipal area. Local government is managed by mayors and city councillors. There are three different types of municipalities we have in South Africa: the metropolitan, which are the biggest ones, local municipalities, as well as the district municipalities. Issues dealt with in this level include electricity delivery, municipal road maintenance, libraries, traffic control, refuse removal, etc. And then we have state-owned corporation as a part of the governance. Here we talk about corporations are enterprises established by the government to produce public goods and services on behalf of the government. So these are businesses that are established or they've been nationalized from the private sector to produce some goods and services on behalf of the government for the sake of social welfare or social wellness. Public corporations are also known as parastatal or state-owned enterprises. We normally call them SOEs. They are companies with limited liability. Parastatals are financially supported by the government through budget system and funded by taxpayers. So they are funded by the government through the budget system, and also the money there or those revenues are coming from the taxpayers. So they are funded through taxpayers' money. South African parastatals include Eskom, Transnet, and Denel. These are our main parastatals we are still having in South Africa. So what is the importance of the public sector? The necessity of the public sector, remember, it can be to produce public goods and services, also to conserve resources, also to manage the economy. Remember, some goods and services are undersupplied by the market. If those goods are undersupplied by the market, the reason for that is that people are not willing to pay for those goods and services. As they are not willing to pay for those goods and services, then the government have to intervene to produce them as public goods because they are very important for social welfare. And some of the goods is difficult to derive satisfaction gain from them. So the government decide to provide them to ensure that social wellness is achieved. Some of the goods that are provided, they are divided into two. We have community goods and collective goods. So we know that some of public goods are free of charge. We don't have to pay anything for them. Why we don't have to pay anything for them? Because it is difficult to really derive the satisfaction gained by an individual. And also they are non-excludable and indivisible. So consumption in there is openly to everyone that is a part of that society. So it will be difficult to ensure that each social member pays for these goods because these goods or services are made available. Like one person pays, one person doesn't pay, but after all, everyone will get satisfaction from these goods and services. Therefore, they are made available for free. We talk about in the street lights, traffic control, etc. We also have collective goods, which are goods that are provided by the government through user charges. These goods are paid for. However, we call these levies or user charges. Why does the government impose user charges on these public goods and services that we call collective goods? They have user charges so that the government can continue to maintain them. If ever it's an infrastructure, it can continue to be maintained. If ever, let's say, we have maybe potholes on a certain road, the government can continue to maintain that road using what we call the money collected from the toll gates. So that also helps the government. It's not for the profit actually, it's for maintaining the infrastructure so that it can continue working. We talk about the likes of city parks where we can pay to get access to entry. In that case, they are paid for so that they can be maintained, because if they are not paid for, it will be difficult for the government to get money to maintain those city parks. So those are some public goods that are paid for, but they are paid through user charges. So let's see. The necessity of the public sector is to provide public goods and services, and then also to conserve resources to manage the economy. Remember, if we talk about the conserved resources, we talk about natural resources. You must always remember that whenever the market sees the environment, it sees it as a common resource to create wealth. So the market overconsumes resources because it is profit motive. It wants to maintain high profits. Therefore, it decides to overconsume natural resources. And also remember that some of them are endangered. They can be depleted. They are in danger of extinction. Therefore, the government must intervene to control those natural resources so that they can be used wisely and be conserved even for future generations. And then to manage the economy. When we were doing business cycle, we spoke about the use of fiscal policies and monetary policies to manage the economy. Whenever we want to avoid the long downswings, the government can intervene by implementing both the fiscal policies and monetary policies to ensure that our economy can quickly recover from that economic slump. So that is to manage economy. Also having to put in place some economic policies that will be encouraging the growth of the economy. So to provide public goods and services provided by the state for use by all members of the society, three groups can be distinguished. Community goods. So these are goods of which they are complete, there's a complete supply or none, e.g. defense or police services. These goods are not paid for. The government simply provides them free of charge to the entire society because these goods are very important for the social welfare. Collective goods differ from community goods as fees or charges or tolls can be levied to exclude them from being free riders. So remember, collective goods are not free riders because they are paid for. There are some user charges that are imposed on those goods to ensure that that particular infrastructure that is producing those goods is well maintained. However, community goods are free riders because they are made available to everyone free of charge. They are not paid for. So we talk about the beaches, drainage, city parks, the toll roads, etc. We also have merit goods. Remember, these are goods that are provided by the government and they are beneficial into the society. In there, we refer to the educational services. We talk about the healthcare services that are provided by the government. So these goods are undersupplied by the market because people are not willing to pay for them. And also because it is difficult to derive satisfaction gained by an individual on using these goods. Therefore, the government decided to intervene and produce these goods. So if you come across the concept public goods, those goods are public goods because the market is undersupplying them due to the fact that people are not willing to pay for them. So you will know that the market only produces goods for those who are willing to pay. So what if the market supply those goods and then few people are in demand of them, but they're important for social wellness? The government must intervene and produce those goods and services to ensure that there is social wellness and social welfare. So goods provided by the state because it is believed that they would be undersupplied if their provision was left entirely to the market forces, e.g. education, healthcare, and research. These are the part of what we call the merit goods. Then number two, to conserve resources. So government has to intervene to protect the environment. If the environment is exposed to insensitive and even careless use, it may be damaged. We know that sometimes people abuse the environment, businesses abuse the environment. The private sector is profit-driven, and is sometimes careless about the pollution they create. Therefore, the state must intervene by protecting the environment. The government must therefore intervene to protect the natural resources by limiting creation of negative externalities through implementation of laws and regulation, and also by imposing some taxes on the use of the environment. To manage the economy, ensures a social and legislative environment, apply suitable and credible economic and development policies. The government can use fiscal and monetary policies to manage the economy, promote policies that ensure equal opportunity for all members of the society, limit anti-competitive behavior by using our Commission Policy Act of South Africa. And then government promotes the effectiveness of the free market by limiting anti-competitive behavior. And then problems of public sector provisioning. These are reasons for poor public sector provisioning. In this case, we are checking why does the public sector poorly provide in our societies. We normally complain and embark into social protests because we are not happy with the provisioning. So in here, we'll be talking about the likes of accountability. The public sector lacks accountability. Public officials are not easily held accountable. So it is very important for public officials to be held accountable for their decision-making on income and expenditure. And for one to be held accountable, it is important that we apply two principles of accountability, which are the participation. People must be able to participate in the economy through voting. And then also the transparency. It is very important that public officials are transparent about the economic conditions and also whatever that happens, so that they can easily be held accountable. Whenever the Minister of Finance presents the budget for the nation, that's a transparency to ensure that they can easily be held accountable. So accountability is lacking in the public sector because public sector is too complex. Remember, our accountability goes through the following. It can be from the society. It can be through formal letters written by the society as they complain about a certain, or as they lay the petition about a certain condition. And then also that can be given maybe to the councillor, the mayor, or to the certain premier as they complain. So they are trying to hold that particular individual accountable. It can also be the community protest, when people decide to protest in the area or the community or the society, showing their unhappiness about something. So whenever they protest, until that particular individual required to comes down and talk to them, that is to be accountable. The person will be, will be explaining to them reasons for that poor provisioning. That we call that accountability, because the person is now explaining and giving reasons for the poor provision. It also happens through the what we call parliamentary questioning. Like today, our president will be in the parliament responding to questions about the SONA State of National Address. So that is to hold him accountable. Also, ministers are also questioned in the parliament by different political parties. Whenever they are questioned, they answer those questions. That is accountability. Also through Auditor General. Remember that all departments are given money by the government in the budget system, and then they are also held accountable through audit, because they submit their books after all. Then they will be checked if ever the money was used accordingly. If ever there are some shortages, they must answer to say why or what happened to that money that is not in there, the shortfall or whatever surplus. Then that is to hold them accountable. And then we talk about efficiency. Remember, if we talk of efficiency, we refer to a situation whereby resources are allocated in a manner that result to optimal or optimum production or output. So in the under public sector, we have what we call Pareto inefficient that exists, whereby it's very much difficult to make someone better without making someone worse off, because we have the scarcity of resources. Financial resources are not enough. So some areas must be compromised so that we focus in other areas. That result to Pareto inefficiency. Remember, inefficiencies are caused by the following under public sector. Firstly, we talk about the corruption. If public officials are using public funds to benefit themselves, that will always result to inefficiencies, because the money that is allocated to do a particular project will not be used for that, but will be used for something else. Also, the what we call the incompetence. If public officials employed in those big offices are not skilled enough to get the job done, they lack experience, they are not trained, that will lead to them not delivering public services accordingly. So that will lead to inefficiencies, because those people do not know actually what they have to do in those big offices, because they lack knowledge about the job, they lack experience. And then also the bureaucracy. So if the bureaucracy is also a problem, because it happens that public officials keep on following rules and regulations beyond control. When they do that, that delays the provision of public goods and service. So bureaucracy will be discussed in detail when we talk about the reasons for public sector failure. Then we talk about assessing needs. We have a problem of assessing needs here. Remember, the private sector find it very easy to assess needs because it uses the demand and supply. However, the government or the public sector find it difficult, because now it doesn't sometimes get accurate numbers of the people. So officials must go down to people and discuss with them what do they actually need, what are the priorities on their needs and wants. Then they can provide public services. So to get that done, the public sector uses what we call the census system, where they do the head count of people in from house to house, and also getting to combine information of those numbers or stats of those people to know how many people are residing in the particular area. Those numbers help the government to provide public goods and services appropriately. This is done to avoid the over provision of public goods or under provision of public goods and services. Remember that State SA in South Africa is responsible to do what? Is responsible to publish information or statistics on number of people that are residing in the particular area. It was done last year in South Africa, and we're informed by State SA that the population size has increased to 60 million in South Africa. So collecting those numbers and getting to know the stats of people living in the particular area help the government to plan very accurate the budget and also provide public goods and services according to the number of people residing in that particular area. We talk about the pricing policy. In this case, we mean the following. Remember, the private sector has the way of setting the price. It uses the price mechanism of demand and supply. But the public sector find it very difficult to determine prices for public goods and services because of the following. Some public goods are provided free of charge. We call them free riders. They are not paid for, that the one that I mentioned as community goods. But some of the public goods are provided through user charges. And remember, those user charges cannot result to the government making a profit. And those user charges are there to ensure that the government can still maintain the infrastructure that is used to produce those public goods and services. And some goods are subsidized. So the government intervened by subsidizing some public goods and services like water and electricity so that people can afford them easily because they are very important for the social wellness or social welfare. And then some municipalities are using what we call the flat charges whenever they impose those municipal charges. So the flat charges means every social member in that area will be paying the same amount of the rate, regardless of the consumption of water and electricity. Some are using flexible charges, which indicates that people will be paying based on the consumption or on the usage. Some are using what we call the discrimination on charges. That occurs when one individual will be paying more money for electricity while the other person in the same area is paying less. That goes with the differing tariffs. Remember, if you consume most of water, your local area can move you from tariff number 1 to tariff number 4, which will make it very expensive for you to buy water. And also, on the side of electricity, the more you consume electricity, there are high opportunities that you can be regarded as a business person. Then you can be moved from lower tariff to the higher tariff. Then you can afford less electricity as you buy compared to your neighbors. And also, you must remember that for the government to set the prices for public goods and services, it considers three things. There is a social interest. It has to check that how is this going to affect the society if ever we increase the price or we decrease the price. There is also economic interest. How will the decision affect the economy of the country? And also we check, there is also political interest. Will the decision affect the business, affect the government or that party that is ruling negatively or positively? If it will be negative, that particular government will refrain from increasing the price because it will be affecting them negative. They will end up losing votes. So those are factors that are considered by the government. So it is very difficult for the government to set price for the public goods and services. Pricing policy does not have a proper mechanism because everything is different. And then we talk about parastatals. Remember, these are the businesses that are owned by the government. They are formed in two ways. They are either formed through nationalization, whereby existing company is bought by the government beyond 50% shares, and then also they might be established from the scratch to produce some public goods on behalf of the government. And also you must know that our parastatals, like I mentioned before, they include the Eskom, Transnet, as well as Denel. So those parastatal or SOEs are funded by the government through the budget system. They are not profit motive. Whatever they produce to ensure social welfare. That's why they are always producing in a form of inefficiency, and also they are not always making profit, but they always seek for financial bailout from the government. Also, what is the problem in there? These parastatals are facing the issue of corruption. The money is misused for personal gain. Also, these parastatals are facing the issue of incompetence. People working in there or officials are lacking knowledge and experience and skills about their job that they are doing. That make it difficult for them to function very easy. Also, they are not. There's a poor level or lack of accountability. They are not held accountable for decision making in there, which will always result to them performing very much inefficiently. Remember, our parastatals are registered under Company Act of South Africa. And then we talk about privatization or nationalization. So under privatization, remember, privatization is the transfer of ownership from the public side to the private sector. The best example that we can give is the privatization of SAA that was privatized, I think, 2 years ago. It's no longer the SOE because more than 50% shares were sold to the private sector. So what is good about privatization? Whenever the business is being privatized, it reduces the burden on the budget for the government. Remember, parastatals are funded by the government. So that when they are sold to the private sector, they will no longer be funded by the government. That relaxes the government budget because there won't be any money going to the parastatal now. So it is the part of the private sector. Also, it is very important for you to know that the parastatals are not paying tax. So if they are sold to the private sector, they will then be responsible to pay tax to the government, which will be increasing government tax revenues. Also remember, if ever businesses are privatized, that increases efficiency because the private sector businesses are profit motive. So they will be very much efficient because they want to keep up with their profits. So that gives advantage of efficiency in the economy. And also it is very important for you to know that if ever businesses are being privatized by to the private sector, that will always improve competition within the market, because businesses are always attracted to invest in the economy where there is less government intervention. So with privatization of most of SOEs, that will always lead to improvement of competition. And also FDIs will be attracted to invest in the country's economy because of the following. Because of, if ever there is less government involvement, the private sector is always willing to intervene in that particular economy and invest. So what is bad about privatization? Remember that private sector is profit motive. So for that sake, if we privatize our SOEs, that will always lead to what will lead to consumers or people being exploited to high prices for those businesses to keep up with their high profits. And then we talk about nationalization. In there, remember, we talk about the transfer of ownership from the private sector to the public sector. That's when privately owned businesses are sold to the government. So we call that nationalization. So what is good about that? Whenever businesses are being nationalized, that will result to people or social members affording those public goods and services at the lower cost. They won't be highly exploited to high prices. But the issue is, arguments against what is bad about nationalization is the fact that it will be creating more monopolies. Remember, most of the businesses that are owned by the government become monopolies. So that will be resulting to one business owning some resources and being the only producer of a certain product. That is bad for the economy. It will improve inefficiency. There will be a high level of inefficiency in the economy because we know that parastatals are inefficient due to the fact that they are not profit motive. Also, we know that if we have parastatals, we have high level of corruption. So those are issues with nationalization. So accountability, we say the government is required to make and implement policies. So the accountability is underpinned by ministerial responsibilities, parliamentary questioning, treasury control, and the auditor general. Public servants are required to provide an explanation of their decisions and action based on income and expenditure. The public holds governments accountable for effective delivery of services and implementation of policies. Two principles of accountability include transparency and participation. And then efficiency. Efficiency is achieved when skills, time, and resources are used in the best possible way to achieve desirable objectives. Goods and services must be provided in a desired quantity and quality. So if we achieve efficiency, public goods will be delivered at the right time, right quantity, and the right quality to the society. If resources are allocated in such a way that no one can be made better off without making someone worse off, Pareto efficiency has been achieved. Reasons for inefficiency include corruption, bureaucracy, as well as incompetence. That has been discussed even before. Assessing needs. Government provides goods and services according to the needs of the people. Market forces determine prices of goods and services for the private sector. However, for the government, they don't exist. State enterprises are not subjected to the market forces such as demand and supply. To provide goods and services to the household in need, government needs to know who are those households and then where these households are and also what are their basic needs. Then goods can be provided. The census system or the census and other household surveys as well as local government structures provide this type of information to the public sector. Government sometimes fails to obtain accurate information and to ensure that only those who qualify receive those services. Remember, having to know number of people residing in the area, having to know what do they need for them to survive. It is very important for the government to obtain accurate numbers so that there won't be under provision of public goods, there won't be over provision of public goods, so that goods can be provided at the right quantity, right time, and the right quality in our communities. Pricing policy. In a market economy, prices are formed through interaction of demand and supply. So unlike in the private sector, the public sector does not have does not use market forces, demand and supply. So it's not confined to the profit maximization. Government is therefore able to take into account certain social, economic, and political conditions as well as public opinion to take prices on public goods and services. We have community goods that are provided free of charge, such as street lights, that are not paid for. And then also we have collective goods that are having user charges. So it is imposed. So people that are willing to use them will be paying for those public goods and services. We talk about the toll roads as well as city parks, etc. And then municipality subsidies, subsidize public goods like water and electricity to make them affordable to citizens. This has resulted to price discrimination on the public sector. Like I mentioned, that some people are paying more because of high tariffs, some are paying less because of low tariff. And then we talk about parastatals. These are SOEs, are businesses, entities that of the public sector that are run on the similar principles as business in the private sector. Parastatals are created in two ways. We talk about the government start the business in order to provide public goods and services, and then also existing enterprise is nationalized, so it will be sold to the public sector. In South Africa, SOEs are companies with limited liability. They have to comply with accounting requirements of the Company Act. SA parastatals include Eskom, Denel, as well as Transnet. Be aware that all of these parastatals are facing the issue of they are providing public goods and services poorly. For instance, Eskom is faced by the issue of load shedding, and then Transnet is not doing very, very well. Also, the Denel is also not doing very well. So parastatals are facing the issue. You must be aware that you can be asked a question about that in your examination. You must be able also to answer, because remember, I said parastatals are facing the issue of corruption, incompetence, lack of accountability, the bureaucracy. So also some social members are not willing to pay for those goods and services provided by the government. So that creates a problem for those parastatals. Parastatals are funded by the government in the national budget through the taxpayers' money. And then we talk about the privatization. Privatization refers to the transfer of functions and ownership from the public sector to the private sector. And then the aim of privatization is to reduce the relative size of the public sector. And then privatization stimulates growth and improves the overall efficiency and performance of the economy, because we know that private sector is efficient since it is profit motive. Privatization provides additional funds to the government through taxes. Remember, I mentioned that since the firm becomes the private sector, now a part of the private sector, it will be paying company or business tax to the government, which will be increasing government tax revenues. Privatization attracts foreign direct investors because investors are always willing to invest in the economy where there is less government interference or government intervention. And the nationalization is a process whereby the state takes control of ownership of private owned assets or businesses to be the part of the public sector. And then we move away from that, we go straight to the SA public sector objectives or macroeconomic objectives. Remember, these are the targets that have been set by the government to be achieved over a certain accounting period. The government is having its own objective to be achieved. So here they are. This includes economic growth, it includes full employment, it includes exchange rate stability or balance of payment equilibrium, includes the price stability as well as economic equity. So if I can simply quickly give you the information on there. Economic growth, we know that each country is willing to achieve high level of economic growth so that there will be improvement of social welfare. So in there, we must define economic growth, measure economic growth, also mention measures used by the government to improve economic growth of the country. So we say economic growth is the increase in productive capacity of the country, or the increase in production of goods and services, or the increase in real GDP, or increase in economic activities. Economic growth is measured by what we call the real GDP. Remember that the real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation. That means inflation rate has been removed in there. And then for economic growth, economic growth will always result to economic development. So in this case, remember, for economic growth to occur, the economic growth rate must increase faster than the population growth rate. And we know that if ever there's economic growth, that will always lead to high demand for labor, and then also high employment, also high disposable income, as well as high or improved standards of living. What does the government do to achieve economic growth in South Africa? South African government tries by all means to ensure that policies like GEAR, that were in place from 1996 were introduced to ensure that we have an improvement of economic growth that can be export orientated. The likes of NGP that was introduced ensures that we have labor intensive industries that will ensure employment and improvement of economic growth. The likes of ASGISA also, they ensure that there is highest improvement of economic growth, ensuring that there is improvement of our infrastructure. So those are some policies used by the government. And then we know that our economic growth has been very, very slow in increase in South Africa over the past years. The highest decline in economic growth was seen during COVID-19 in 2020. Full employment, this one occurs when all economically active population that have been looking for jobs are employed. So this talks about the narrowed unemployment. We know that full employment is the priority for the government to be achieved because it results to the improvement of social welfare, can also lead to improvement of the economic growth. And we know that South African unemployment has increased over the past years, caused by some different reasons. For the government to achieve full employment, it tries to encourage informal sector activities so that people can be able to get those jobs. The government also, people can be able to get jobs and also to self-employ themselves. The government also has introduced policies such as EPWP to ensure that people in underprivileged areas are able to get jobs and also skills so that they can be used those skills even for future. And then we talk about exchange rate stability. This is all about the exchange rate that does not appreciate and depreciate over time. Remember, if ever the currency can appreciate and depreciate over time, that can create uncertainties for the country and for the government. So investors will always find it difficult to invest in the country where there is a vulnerable exchange rate. We know that South Africa is using the free floating exchange rate, which is determined by market forces, demand and supply, without any interference by the government or the central bank. And then price stability, this refers to the price that do not increase or decrease over time. We know that we talk about volatile prices. Volatile prices, we talk about those prices that are vulnerable. They can change anytime. Example can be the price of red meat. Those prices create uncertainties in the economy for both investors as well as the consumers. So in South Africa, South African Reserve Bank introduced the inflation target of between 3 to 6% to ensure that prices do not increase and decrease beyond or below the margin. And also, we know that interest rate is the main instrument used by the government or Reserve Bank to ensure that price stability is achieved in South Africa. Remember, if ever there's a price instability, let's say the prices are increasing very quick, that will lead to the inflation and result to people becoming more vulnerable, causing poverty. It will cause poverty, and also the economy will be vulnerable because there will be a lower demand for goods and services, which will be leading to firms producing less goods and services, and that will be resulting to lower economic activities. And then economic equity. In this case, we refer to the economy that does not have huge income gap between the rich and the poor. However, we know that in South Africa, we're facing the issue of high level of inequalities because rich people are getting even more richer, while poor people are getting even more poor. So what does the South African government do to achieve the economic equity? Our government is trying by all means to ensure that it uses the progressive tax system whereby high income earners are being taxed more and low income earners are being taxed less. And that money or those revenues gained there are used for redistribution in the economy. South African government also try to provide social transfer to our society to ensure that people are able to live above the poverty line. Also, the government provides some services free of charge. We talk about benefits in natura or benefits in income, such as free public healthcare, free education, defense force. They are provided for free to ensure that all people can be able to access basic needs within the country. Also, our government introduced the Black Economic Empowerment that failed, and then the Triple BE, which is the broad-based Black Economic Empowerment, was also introduced to replace BE to ensure that Black people are able to participate in the economic mainstream. They are also entitled to procurement, meaning they are able to own assets and resources in the economy. The government also used land reform policies to ensure that the land that was lost during the apartheid is also regained back. But there are two ways. It can be land redistribution and land restitution. Remember, if we talk about land redistribution, we mean the government is giving back the land to those people that lost it. That land can mainly be for agricultural purposes or business purposes. And then also, we talk about land restitution, whereby the government provide financial resources or money as a compensation to people that lost their land forcefully during the apartheid. So those are some measures done by the government. Also, the government provides some public goods and services to reduce economic inequalities in South Africa. So let's check. So objectives of the public sector. So we can say IFEP, that can be used as a mnemonic to remember headings of the main objectives of the public sector. So we have E for economic growth, F for full employment, E for exchange rate stability, P for price stability, and E for economic equity. So let's see. Economic growth being explained referred to the increase in productive capacity of the country or production of goods and services of the country or increase in real GDP in a country. Economic growth is the increase in economic activities of the country, like I mentioned before. And then it is measured in terms of the real GDP. Remember that real GDP refers to a GDP figure that has been adjusted for inflation. That is known as GDP at constant prices. Remember that. So real GDP refers to GDP figures that have been adjusted for inflation. It does not have any inflation effect. It has been removed. Mostly we talk about in our base year prices. For economy to serve all social needs, economic development, economic growth must increase higher than the population growth rate in a country. Growth and development in a country benefits citizens because it often leads to high standards of living and poverty relief in our societies. So GEA, which is the growth, employment and redistribution, NGP, which is the new growth path, and then ASGISA, which is Accelerated and Shared Growth Initiative for South Africa, are some economic growth policies implemented by the government to pursue or to ensure economic growth. And then we talk about the full employment. Full employment occurs when all economically active population who have been active looking for jobs can be able to find jobs or are employed. So we talk about EAP in there. Remember the age in there. And then a high level of employment is the most important economic objective for the government. Remember, if people are employed, that can lead to greater demand for goods and services. If people are demanding more goods and services, that can encourage business to produce more goods, which will lead to even increase in GDP and economic growth. Employment rate is measured by considering the number of people employed and economically active population. The unemployment rate increased over the past few years, reaching about 34.9% in 21, but was down to 31.9% in the third quarter of 2023. And then we continue the full employment. High level of unemployment has an effect of less demand and high level of social and economic instability. If ever people are not employed, that will lead to less demand for goods and services, and also it will cause high level of social instability, such as there will be crime, there will be protest, and there will be poverty. Also, there will be economic instability because if people are unemployed, that means the demand for goods and services is declining. That means firms are discouraged to produce more, and then our real GDP will be declining, resulting to lower economic growth. The government emphasized the support of informal sector businesses as a mechanism to reduce high level of unemployment in South Africa. Labor-intensive industries such as agricultural industry remain as a key industry to access employment subsidies so that there will be high level of employment in South Africa. Growth, employment and redistribution GEA as a strategy was implemented to create positive climate that was conducive to employment creation by the private sector. And then exchange rate stability or balance of payment equilibrium. So exchange rate is the currency of one country in relation to another country's currency. That's why we compare our currencies in terms of the value. So South Africa uses the free floating exchange rate, which is capable of appreciation and depreciation without any limits because there is no interference of government or central bank. Depreciation and appreciation of the currency creates uncertainties for producers, traders, and investors, and it should be limited. Whenever the currency can appreciate and depreciate anytime, that makes our economy to be more vulnerable because investors tend to lack confidence over investing in our country because they cannot guarantee their benefits. Too vulnerable exchange rate hampers investment because investors cannot guarantee their gains or their profits. A stable exchange rate ensures a country's competitiveness on the global market. So whenever our currency becomes more stable, remember, stability doesn't mean that the currency is constant. It can appreciate or depreciate, but with smaller margins. That can guarantees that our country can be very much competitive in the global markets because we are also exporters. We continue with the exchange rate stability. Effective fiscal policy and monetary policy can be used to keep the exchange rate relatively stable. Exchange rate has a greater impact on balance of payments as well as the terms of trade. Remember, if ever our exchange rate is appreciating, that will be increasing our terms of trade. But if it depreciates, that will be decreasing our terms of trade. Remember also, if ever our currency is too strong, that will lead to our export becoming more expensive. Then there will be less demand for our goods abroad because they are expensive. But if our currency depreciates, that will lead to our exports becoming more cheap abroad, which will increase the demand for those goods and services abroad, and our exports will be increasing. However, it has an effect also on terms of trade, like I mentioned before. Remember, that has an effect on the balance of payment. If exports are very expensive, they are lessly demanded, that will be decreasing our trade balance, resulting to the trade deficit on our current account. If our currency depreciates, our exports can be highly demanded, which will lead to what we call export increasing more than imports, that will result to our trade surplus on the BOP, or balance of payment. That will be discussed on the next chapter and on our next session. The strong exchange rate increases terms of trade in the short run, but decrease in the long run, as the demand of goods can decrease depending on elasticity of demand for that particular exported product. Weak exchange rate decrease the terms of trade and increase the trade surplus, as the demand for exports is also increasing in the foreign or global market. Other exchange rate systems include the managed floating exchange rate, as well as the fixed exchange rate. Remember, the managed floating exchange rate can appreciate and depreciate within limits. So there's a control that has been set by the government to maintain minimum and maximum limits of the currency as it can appreciate and depreciate. The fixed exchange rate is pegged, cannot change it until the government decides to change it. It remains fixed for the given period of time. And then the price stability. Price stability refers to prices that do not increase or decrease over time. So those are prices that are not volatile, and they are not also vulnerable. Inconsistent prices make the market more vulnerable for investment. So investors will find it very difficult to invest in the economy where the prices are unstable, because they cannot really guarantee their benefit or their gains over that country's economy. Stable prices lead to better results in terms of job creation and economic growth. Remember that if prices are very much stable, that will be attracting more investors to invest in the country. That can lead to even more job creation, which can lead to greater demand for goods and services as people are getting income. And then as the demand increase, that can also result to increase in real GDP and also economic growth. The South African Reserve Bank target is between 3 to 6%, meaning our inflation rate cannot decrease below 3%, cannot increase above 6%. If ever it happens, the central bank must intervene to ensure that prices are stable by using mainly monetary policy, which the main instrument there is our repo rate or interest rate. So repo rate is the main instrument used by the South African Reserve Bank to achieve the price stability. So whenever the government tries to reduce prices that are too high or inflation is beyond 6%, it will be intervening by increasing repo rate. As the repo rate increases, other interest rates by commercial banks will also be increasing. Remember, repo rate is the interest rate charged by the central bank to commercial banks on their borrowings. So other interest rates such as the prime rate and all the nominal interest rate will be affected. They will be increasing also, resulting to people or clients for commercial banks borrowing less money from commercial banks because the credit will be very expensive. That will decrease money supply and less demand for goods and services. And then those prices will decrease if ever they were caused by the demand pull inflation. We continue the price stability. The consumer price index and producer price index are used to determine the level of prices for both consumers' basket and also the cost of production. These are indicators for what we call for inflation or prices in our economy. If inflation exceeds the higher limit, which is 6% according to the target range, the South African Reserve Bank must consider increasing interest rate to cool down the overheated economy. This was discussed when we were smoothing the business cycle. If inflation drops below the low target, which is 3%, which can be seen as a deflation, South African Reserve Bank must reduce interest rate to stimulate the economy. Too high inflation rate decreases the buying power of money and decrease aggregate demand. If ever there is high level of inflation, the buying power of money will be decreasing. People will then be affording less goods and services, which will even lead to poverty. Then economic equity. Economic equity refers to reasonable division of income among the population, meaning we don't have huge income gap between rich and poor. South Africa is one of the world countries with high economic inequalities. So we know that we are vulnerable. There's a high level of economic inequalities in South Africa. Very few people share more economic resources and wealth, while more people are sharing less economic resources and wealth in South Africa. The distribution of income and wealth is measured through Lorentz curve. Remember the one that we covered in grade 11, to show the degree of inequalities and equalities as well as inequalities. We also use the Gini coefficient to measure that fairness or unfairness of distribution of income. Redistribution of income and wealth is essential to empower everyone to participate in the economic mainstream. It is very important that the government intervene by redistribution. That's when the government collect taxes from those that are earning more income and redistribute it back to those people that are earning less or that are earning no income, so that everyone can participate in the economic mainstream in South Africa. South African government uses progressive tax system, like I mentioned, whereby high income earners are being taxed more than low income earners, and that money is redistributed to the society, to those people that are not employed, that are not earning any income, also through providing public goods and services, including merit goods, through providing social transfers and social services. Free social services such as basic education, primary health care, and to finance basic economic services, social transfers are government methods to reduce economic inequalities. That's when the government intervene by redistributing to society or to social members so that they can be able to live above the poverty line. The legislation of South Africa has imposed minimum wage and the use of administered prices to attempt to reduce economic inequalities in South Africa. And then we move to budget. Remember, we have our main budget, which is the national budget. We have our provincial budget. We have the local or municipal budget. Then in there, we'll be talking about medium-term budget, policy statement, MTPPS, as well as MTF, medium-term expenditure framework. So it is very important for you to remember that the budget is a formal document that projects income and expenditure for the certain accounting period. So the main budget, it is the document with expected income and expenditure for the certain accounting period. And then it is the statement of government planned expenditure and anticipated income for a certain fiscal year. The budget, is the most important item on the economic calendar, because that's where the government try to be transparent to all social members about availability of funds and the expenditure that has been planned over the public sector. So whenever the government intervenes by deliberating on the budget, it tries to be transparent enough so that it can be held accountable by social members in case things are not happening very well. Remember, on the budget, we can have the budget surplus and the budget deficit. And also, we have the benchmark that have been set on the state debts on the as for GDP should not be above 6%. So the main budget is presented by the Minister of Finance, which is currently Mr. Enoch Godongwana. It is presented on the last week of February every year. So for this time, it will be done on the 21st of February this year, which will be next week. There will be presentation of the main budget in there. The government financial year stretches from 1st of April until the 31st of March the following year. Remember, our financial year begins on the 1st of April in South Africa and ends on the 31st of March the following year. That is known as a accounting period of fiscal year. The main budget is is 1 year layout of income and expenditure of the country. It does not estimate the period of 3 years like your MTEF and MTPPS, but it estimates 1 year. That's why we also call this one. It can be it's a 1 year rolling. So it means every year there will be a main budget that will be focusing on that particular financial year, unlike the MTPPS and MTF that will be projecting 3 years, whereby every year, whenever the year is ending, 1 year is ended. 1 year is added on that. And then let's continue with the main budget. Financial resources are distributed across various government departments for a fiscal year. That's when the government allocates income to those government departments that can be used for that particular fiscal year. And then also there will be projected expenditure. It is authorized in the parliament and signed by the president. It becomes a law. Once it's signed by the government or the president, it becomes a law in South Africa. Then the Minister of Finance can present it. Remember that Department of Finance is very important in there to ensure that the national budget is compiled. to compile the national budget or the main budget, different government departments will be submitting their requisitions to the Department of Finance, and then they will be compiling to see the feasibility of those needs, and then they will start to quote to see if the money can be made available. Then the main budget can be compiled with the involvement of all of those departments in there, because they have submitted their requisitions. Remember also, it is very important to know that this budget is very much dependent on the MTEF, medium term expenditure framework, because the long-term planning is done in prior, so that after that it will then be taken year after year to compile the budget. Also note that there is also MTBPS, medium term budget policy statement, which is very important because that is the one that is presented on the last week of October every year, which really check all changes that has occurred on what you call on the from February until October on the fiscal year or on the main budget. Those changes are reviewed, and then after doing that, they will be checking that long-term plan that has been happening over the past years, and then they compile the main budget, which will be presented the following year. So the main budget is very much embedded on these other budgets that I will talk about as I go on. The financial year of the government runs from the 1st of April until the 31st of March the following year. It's been mentioned before. The main source of income for the government is tax. The government receives most of the income from taxes. The state also uses borrowings and the sale of state assets as a source of income. The state can also borrow money from local organizations or international organizations to fund its budget, which can even cause even the budget deficit if ever the money used to plan the budget is the one that has been borrowed from other organizations instead of using its own funds. And then budget deficit occurs when the state uses most of borrowed revenues than its own revenues to finance its budget. That is known as a budget deficit. And then the medium-term expenditure framework, MTEF. MTEF is a plan of estimated revenues and expenditure which runs for the period of 3 years. That's why this one is also known as a rolling budget, because it estimates the 3-year rolling. Whenever 1 year is ending or lapsing, 1 year is added in there. The medium-term expenditure framework requires that the state set budget over the 3-year period, consisting of rolling expenditure and revenues projections. So this MTEF was formed in what we call in 1997 to ensure that departments are able to plan for long term and also to improve the principle of transparency in South African economy. The fiscal framework lays down the resources that are likely to be available to the government from taxes and other sources of income during the new budget cycle. We continue. From this information, departments will prepare their MTF, which include the cost of completing existing and new policy proposal. If ever there are projects that are going on, there will be a part of the project. Also, if there are new projects, they will also be part of that as they compile their requisitions and submit so that there can be compilation. And then the MTF is presented yearly on the last week of February. This is a mistake, in the parliament, while the MTBPS is the one presented on the last week of October every year. It informed the government on how revenues should be collected for the period of 3 years. This is where the government simply decide to say, this is the expenditure. We will be receiving so much money over the next 3 years. And then the source of income will be maybe tax revenues will also be, taxes will be a source of income. Also maybe the sale of state assets, or also maybe the tariffs from import, etc. The government have to provide the detailed information to say, where will this money be coming from that is planned over the period of 3 years. Then MTBPS, medium-term budget policy statement. So the MTBPS is presented yearly by the Minister of Finance on the last week of October. So it is presented in there. Remember, this one reviews changes that has occurred on the main budget since February, the presentation of the main budget. It is a very important, what we call statement, because it simply informs the upcoming main budget. Everything is consolidated. It is based on assessment. It assesses the current economic conditions so that there will be some changes that are needed for the next financial year as they present the new budget on the following year. So this kind of the budget is also, statement is very important. This one is not the budget, it's a statement that is used to inform the next budget and all that
reviews some changes that occur during the financial year, but it is presented on the last week of October by the Minister of Finance. So it estimates the period of 3 years also, like the MTEF. It provides the country with the government official economic forecast for the next 3 years. That's why they simply predict and see what might be happening in the next 3 years for the economy as they assess the current economic conditions. So it is very important for you to know that all of these three are very important, and they are built on one another. You talk about the MTEF, which will be estimating the period of 3 years. It goes in line with the MTPPS. And then you talk about the main budget, which is also important because when it's being compiled, it is compiled after the long-term planning was done on the MTEF. So you must know that they do link these three, the MTEF, MTPPS, as well as the main budget. Remember, our main budget can be separated, can be separated into three. We have the national budget, which is the main budget presented by the main Minister of Finance in South Africa. We have the provincial budget. We have also municipal budget that is also presented. Then we move to the fiscal policy. Remember, we have spoken about the fiscal policy before when we were busy discussing smoothing of the business cycle, but now we focus on its own topic in details. Fiscal policy is a policy by the government composed by taxation, government spending, including government debts or borrowing, used to influence economic activities. Remember, whenever fiscal policy is being implemented, either expansionary or contractionary, there will be some changes in the economic activities. Fiscal policy instruments include government spending, taxation, as well as state debts or borrowings. Remember, the government can also borrow money from local organizations or international organizations to fund its own budget or its own spending. The functions of fiscal policy to distribute income. It is there for consumption, also to ensure that the price level is influenced. So let's check on those explanation. Income distribution, progressive tax system is used, remember, as a part of redistribution. Whenever the government taxes those people that are earning income and those businesses, that money or those revenues will be used for redistribution to those people that are in need. So regressive tax scales will income distribution even more uneven, and then it will lead to income distribution to be even more uneven. Proportional tax scales have no influence on the distribution of income. Spending on social goods, social security, and welfare payments supplement the income of poor people more than the ones of the rich. Remember, the government intervenes by taking those revenues and spending to the society so that people can be able to live above the poverty line and afford basic needs. The aggregate demand, both direct and indirect taxes will always change consumer spending. For instance, if ever taxation has been increased, there will be lower demand for goods and services. But if tax has been reduced, there will be more money on the pocket of the consumer, resulting to greater demand for goods and services. Direct taxes will decrease the disposable income of consumers. The effect will depend on the propensity to consume and also savings. So if ever direct taxes are being decreased, that will lead to more disposable income for the household, and there will be greater demand for goods depending on the savings on consumption. The income multiplier kicks in when government spending increases because of higher level of employment and increase in income consumption, as well as spending will be increasing. Indirect taxes have an effect on the consumption patterns of household. We know that any kind of the taxes, like if ever the indirect taxes have been reduced, there will be more real income. It's being increased, there will be less real income, because indirect taxes, as they increase, they also increase the selling price on goods and services. Consumption will decrease if taxes increases, as goods become even more expensive in the economy. Essential items are less prone to changes than expensive luxury items. The price level. Direct taxes could relieve inflationary pressure by lowering aggregate demand. If ever there is increase in direct tax, people remain with less disposable income, then they demand less goods and services, which will be lowering what? It will then be lowering the inflation pressure, inflation effect. It could also result to cost push inflation by stimulating workers to press for wage increase to maintain their real income. If ever the direct taxes have been increased, that will lead to workers embarking into strikes and demanding high wages, which can cause even high cost push inflation in our economy. An increase in indirect taxes will increase the selling price for goods and services, resulting to people demanding less. Incentives and disincentives. We know that direct taxes potentially reduce incentive to work, to save, and to invest. If ever direct taxes have been increased, like personal income tax, that will lead to people being very much discouraged to work because their most of income goes to the government. And then also, if company taxes or corporate taxes have been increased, that will be a disincentive for businesses to invest, because even to produce, because most of their revenues go straight to the government. If ever the indirect taxes have been increased, that's a disincentive to produce, because businesses find it difficult, since it increased the selling price for businesses, resulting to consumers demanding less goods and services. So high progressive tax rate of income tax discourage some people from entering or staying at workforce, because most of their income goes to the government. Some are discouraged from working extra hours, and some from taking promotions, because that will be taking them to the next tax bracket, which is known as bracket creep. And then tax evasion is illegal practice that occurs when the when the workers or businesses decide not to disclose their sources of income. Remember, if ever taxation is too high, there will be what we call a tax evasion, which is an illegal practice that occurs when people or businesses do not disclose their sources of income to SARS, and that's a problem. It is illegal in South Africa. Tax avoidance is a legal way to reduce the tax burden. Burden is normally done by businesses. Those that are normally using the green energy, they are subsidized by the government. They are also exempted from paying taxation. Then we have a Laffer curve. Remember, if we talk of the Laffer curve, we talk about the curve that explains the relationship between the tax rates and tax revenues. So here we'll be discussing both on tax rate and tax revenues, and also illustrating the graph to show you how the taxation will be affected, how will the tax revenues be affected if ever tax rate is increasing abnormally. So it is being defined, like I mentioned, Laffer curve explains relationship between tax rate and tax revenues. Remember, tax rate is the rate that is imposed by the government to taxpayers, and then tax revenues is the income received by the government from taxes. Too much tax rate reduces the level of income from employees, consumers, and firms in the business. So if ever there's too much tax rate, that will be reducing their income, resulting to them sometimes not even disclosing their sources of income, reducing the consumption, because there will be lower disposable income because of high taxes. Low tax rate reduces state revenues generated from tax. If ever the tax rate is too low, there will be less tax revenues or income received from tax by the government. Reasonable tax rate maximizes government tax revenue. If ever tax rate is too reasonable, that will lead to the government maximizing its tax revenues. And then this illustrates the negative relationship between tax rate and tax revenue. So if ever tax rate is too high, there will be lower tax revenue. If ever tax rate is normal, is not abnormal, there will be maximum tax revenues received by the government. So this simply explains inverse or negative relationship between tax rates and tax revenues. The higher is the tax rate, the lower is the government tax revenues, because businesses and people will be involved in tax evasion, which is known to be an illegal practice. They won't be disclosing their sources of income, and some businesses will be using the legal practice, which is known as tax avoidance, so that they can be exempted from paying tax. So here is the Laffer curve. There we have our vertical axis and horizontal. On our vertical, we have tax revenues, which is the income received by the state on taxes. And then on horizontal, we have our tax rate, which is what the ratio that is charged by the government on taxpayers. So this is the combination. So our Laffer curve will be coming. So we are only connecting points for now, so that our curve will simply come and join there. So we have our tax rate, and then points are indicated, the point A, point B, point C, and then we have 60 in there as tax rate, up to 100 from 0. And then there is our Laffer curve coming. If you can check, this curve is upward sloping from 0. So it slopes up it becomes positive whenever tax rate is reasonable. Why? That is because taxpayers are still willing to pay tax. If ever tax rate is 10%, taxpayers are happy because less of their income goes to the government. So they are all willing to pay tax to the government. That's why the Laffer curve is upward sloping. Then that increased tax revenues from 0 to 60 billion. So in that case, there's a positive slope. And then also we continue, whenever tax rate increase to 40%, what happens? The tax revenues increase because it's still a normal part. People or business are willing to pay tax up to 40% in this case. It's still not bad, it's reasonable. There is no tax evasion or tax avoidance in this case. People are encouraged. We call this point the apex point, which is the highest point of the Laffer curve. From the point B, that simply means the what we call tax revenues will be no longer increasing because the tax rate will be becoming abnormal. Meaning, if tax rate increases further to 60%, people and businesses will be involved on tax evasion. They won't be willing to disclose their sources of income to SARS, which will be leading to tax revenues decreasing slightly from 100 billion going down to 60 billion. That is indicated by point C. Whenever tax rate becomes abnormal to 60%, there will be an illegal practice of tax evasion whereby people won't be paying tax. That will lead to government having to face the decrease in tax revenues from 100 billion to 60 billion. So the Laffer curve start to be downward sloping now, concurring to the decrease in tax revenues. Whenever tax rate increases further to 100%, that simply means whoever that is employed, any business in the economy is working for the government. That means any revenue received by businesses and received by workers goes straight to the government. That simply indicates that our tax revenues will be declining from 60 billion to 0 because no one will be willing to work if ever the whole income they earn goes straight to the government. No business will be functioning in the economy if ever the whole revenues they earn go straight to the government. That results to tax revenues declining straight to 0 because tax rate is 100. So this illustrates the fact that if tax rate is reasonable, the Laffer curve will be upward sloping until it reaches the apex point whereby the tax rate is reasonable. Then whenever the tax rate becomes abnormal, like 60 to 100, the Laffer curve will start to be sloping downward until it reaches, it touches our horizontal axis there, where tax revenues will be 0. So this is your Laffer curve being drawn. Let's look at the explanation. If tax is reasonable for both the taxpayers and the government, tax revenues will be increasing. We saw from 0 to 60 billion. This results to the maximum tax revenue collected by the government, indicated by the apex at the top of on the Laffer curve. So if it continues to be normal and reasonable, the government will be maximizing its tax revenues on the apex point. And then too low tax rate advantages taxpayers and disadvantage the government because there will be lower tax revenues and also taxpayers will be paying less tax, which is good for them. Too high tax rate discourage taxpayers and result to tax evasion and also tax avoidance. This results to the lowest tax revenues collected by the government within the economy. This is the Laffer curve explained. Between the tax rate at 0 and the tax rate at 40, Laffer curve is upward sloping. We can see from tax rate at 0 to 40, Laffer curve goes up until it reaches this point in there. It is upward sloping. And then we continue. This is because tax rate is reasonable. So all parties in the economy are willing to pay tax. And then if tax rate is 10%, tax revenues are 60 billion indicated by letter A. Here is the point, A, which means that lower tax rate prevent the state from maximizing its tax revenues. Because it's lower, the government cannot maximize its tax revenues. Tax rate at 40 result to the government maximizing its tax revenues. That is indicated by point B at the apex point. It is reasonable, so people and business are willing to pay tax to the government. And then we continue. Apex means that no extra revenues can be received by the state after reaching 100 million or 100 billion here. So this point indicates that there is no extra tax revenues to be received. If ever tax rate keep on increasing, then the Laffer curve would be downward sloping and then concurring to the decrease in tax revenues from 100 to 60, even up to 0. The further increase in tax rate to 60 result to the decline in tax revenues to 60 million, indicated by point C. This is the point. The Lafayette curve tends to be down and slope downward, indicating the effect of the increase in tax rate on tax revenues. As tax rate keep on increasing, tax revenues will be decreasing, resulting to the Lafayette curve being downward sloping. The tax evasion and tax avoidance occur in this case when taxpayers find tax rate as a great burden. Then there will be tax evasion, whereby they will want to disclose in their source of income, tax avoidance, whereby they will be involved on some committee projects on behalf of the government, so that they will be given the green light on tax, or having what we call a tax exemptions. The tax rate at 100 result to the tax revenues being 0. You can see if tax rate is 100, tax revenue is 0, because no one will be willing to function in the economy if ever the whole of their revenues go straight to the government. So South African taxation. South Africa uses progressive tax system. You must know that it is progressive because those that are earning less income are taxed less, and those that are earning more income are taxed more. High income earners pay more tax, while low income earners are paying less tax. The increase in income tax for any taxpayer increases taxable income and tax bracket. If an individual receive more income, that can be pushing an individual to the next tax bracket, and that is also an issue. That's why some people sometimes find it difficult if ever their income has increased with a huge margin, because they will be moving to the tax bracket. Remember, tax bracket refers to what? Refers to the certain grouping of taxation that is payable by either businesses or individuals based on their income group. Tax bracket is the annual income group category at which taxpayers are classified. The tax bracket creeping occurs when inflation pushes income to the high tax bracket. And then this indicates South African tax bracket for 2023-2024. You can see that an individual that is earning 0 to 237,100 is being taxed 18%. And then we have also 237,101 to 370,000, and then it's being taxed about 26%, and then going down there. So this is what we call the tax bracket. All people according to per annum or annual income. This is annual income, not the monthly income. It is multiplied by 12 months. Then people are taxed according to that. You can see that tax rate goes further to 31%, 36%. 39%, 41%, and 45%, depending on the annual income or income per year that is earned by an individual or even by the business. So public debt as a percentage of GDP. In South Africa, the government budget has run at deficit for many years, as the state expenditure has exceeded the state income. In South Africa, we're facing the issue of the budget deficit. So it is very difficult because we use most of the borrowed revenues to finance our budget. That has resulted to our debts on the budget increasing beyond 60%, which is currently at 72%. The deficit rule states that that shortage on budget should not exceed 3% of the GDP. In the event of budget deficit, government may borrow money from local or from international to fund its budget. The borrowing rule states that borrowing must only be used for capital expenditure, and that current expenditure be financed from the current income. The debt rule states that the public, state that public debt should not exceed 60% of nominal GDP. As much as we have debts, we should not increase 60% of our nominal GDP. So in South Africa, we are above that 60% of state debts on nominal GDP. And then we talk about the public sector failure. In this case, we check what are the reasons for the public sector failure. What is the public sector failure? So public sector failure occurs when the economy and the country's resources are managed in such a way that the welfare of people is compromised. So that's when resources are not provided accordingly, and people are being ignored as they desire or need or require those basic needs to be provided. There's a high level of inefficiency that exists. The delivery of public services is ineffective and inefficient. We call that the public sector failure. That's when public goods are not provided at the right quantity, right quality, and the right time. There's a poor quality of services being delivered, and some resources are undersupplied or underprovided, some are overprovided. So that's a public sector sector failure. This makes it difficult for the government to achieve its objectives that were mentioned before if ever there's a public sector failure. So we'll be checking now which are those reasons for the public sector failure. We have management failure, we have special interest groups, we have apathy, we have politicians, we have structural weaknesses, bureaucracy, lack of motivation. So in this case, if we talk about management failure, we refer to a situation whereby in a certain office, management is very much weak to the point that they lack experience, they lack knowledge, and they lack skills about the duty that they are given to do. In that case, that will always lead to inefficient provision of public goods and services, because people in the office are not aware of their main duties. They lack the experience that is required. Even the decision making is not at the good point, to the point that those people employ people based on nepotism or cadre employment, which does not result to effectiveness and efficiency in the public sector. The special interest group, here we talk about the very powerful group that exists in the societies that have power to manipulate government decision making. We talk about the likes of Tax Association, Chamber of Commerce, those, also Association of Farmers. They have huge influence over the government decision making, because they can simply decide to embark into the strike if ever whatever they need is not adhered to, and that will lead to the government having to listen to them, and the result to rent seeking, because when the money is supposed to be allocated to the particular department, it will be converted to them. That is known to be a rent seeking. And then apathy. In this case, we refer to a situation whereby public officials do not care. Like they know that they will never be held accountable, so they will always be behaving in a manner that does not produce efficiency and effectiveness of the public sector, because they will never be held accountable. We talk about politicians. Remember, we have elections coming, so politicians will be seen now moving up and down, trying to promise people whatever thing that they need in the community. So politicians appear when it's time for voting. So they appear to promise people in the society everything that they think they need. After that, they will be even increasing spending for the society, because they want votes. We call that the rent seeking, and also they are buying votes. After that, they disappear after elections, after being voted for. They come back again when they want to be voted for. So politicians are the problem, because they can inflate government spending so that they can benefit themselves through getting votes. Structural weaknesses. In this case, we talk about the poor structure within the public sector, whereby we have we have officials that are having conflicting ideas. They make, there are policies that are working against each other, which will always lead to inefficient provision of public goods and services. We talk about bureaucracy. In this case, we refer to public officials that are very much using, invested into rules and regulations instead of providing public services. In this case, we'll talk about the simple example. Maybe your brain has called ESCOM to come and fix maybe the meter at home. They are there to fix the meter, and then the neighbor comes around to say, my meter is also a problem, please help me. Then the person there, or the engineer, will say, please call this number, and then they will direct you when they will be coming to assist you. But they are just here to render the service. But what is going to happen? You will have to call the office, so that new person will be appointed at the later stage to come and assist you. That is called the bureaucracy, following rules and regulations beyond control, which delays the provision of public goods and services. We talk about lack of motivation. This is when public officials or public servants or public workers are not highly appreciated for the great job they are doing. But what is noted is their mistake that they are doing only. So this results to them being demotivated, and they end up being very much inefficient when providing public goods and services. This results to apathy, whereby they won't even be caring about about producing or providing public goods and services, because nobody cares about them. Nobody cares about their good doing. Instead, they are well monitored whenever they are doing something wrong within that particular office. So to remember, we have a sentence here which says, manage South African police service or public services before liabilities. This will help you to remember all of this listing. Manage South African public services before liability. So let's check now. This is an essay. Remember, it's a part of section C. We talk about management failure. So government departments are poorly managed due to bureaucracy, lack of leadership, training, and experience. Those public officials are not well trained, so that will lead to poor provision of public goods and services. Incompetent public officials inefficiently use allocated budget to provide public goods and services. If they are incompetent, that means they are not skilled enough. They don't even know what to do. So the budget will not be used efficiently. You'll find that they report that there's a surplus of the budget or surplus of funds because they didn't know what to do due to the fact that they lack experience. Management failure is a result of political deployment, nepotism, fraud, and corruption. Some public officials are deployed based on political exposure with fake qualifications. The state takes time to track their merit. That takes a long period of time after they have worked for more than 20 years in the office and resulted to inefficiency. Public funds management require principle of transparency, assessment of social needs, and accountability. So if that thing is not done, it will always be difficult for public funds to be distributed according to those social members in the society. We continue with the management failure. Ignorance, applying conflicting policies, or getting the timing of policy changes wrong result to management failure. If management have personal and hidden agendas and that benefit individuals rather than benefiting the society, we call that rent seeking. The public sector fails because social welfare is compromised for individual interest. So there's only a self-interest, no social interest. We talk about bureaucracy. Public servants tend to be emphatic on obeying rules and regulations rather than providing public services. That always delay the provision of public services. They ensure that rules of procedures are flexible and complex to tamper with. That delays the provision of public goods and services and will always result to inefficiency in the economy. Bureaucrats are insensitive to needs of the public as they tend to be aggressive when implementing policies. You know better about that. They will always be ensuring that policies are implemented in the right way. However, goods and services to the society will not be provided accordingly. Bureaucrats can manipulate government policy in such a way that benefit themselves at the expense of the society. They ensure that they make rules and regulations to work in their favor instead of working in the favor of the society. For instance, a police personnel only attend the cases with the case number, not random street reports. So you can come across a situation whereby you are troubled in the community or on the street. They have taken your phone and then policemen are coming around. You report, they tell you to go and open the case. Then they can only attend if there's a case number. But the person that have caused that issue is just around here. So that also delay the provision of public goods and services in the society. We talk about apathy, which is a part of ignorance and they don't care notion. That's when people or public servants do not care because they know they will never be held accountable. Ignorance, lack of commitment, and lack of social interest promote inefficiency and rent seeking. That's when people know that I'm employed and I will get paid at the end of the month, but I don't care about providing public service because I will never be held accountable. That might be caused by the fact that a person was employed due to what we call nepotism or cadre employment or political deployment. Successful public production relies on long-term accountability. Accountability is the duty of an individual organization to explain their decisions and actions and accept responsibility of their behavior. But if people are not held accountable, the apathy will always go on and public service will always be delayed in that particular area, in that particular department. It is not easy to hold public sector accountable because of huge workforce of various departments. So public sector is too complex. Lack of accountability leads to inefficiency, corruption, and poor service delivery because these inefficiencies are not diagnosed. So we can only, or public sector can only diagnose these inefficiencies by holding some people accountable or by holding some officials accountable. So if they are not held accountable, the apathy will continue and service will not be delivered in our communities. In developing countries, accountability often failed. Citizens are voiceless. The lack of motivation. Workers rarely receive incentive for successful service delivery. So that will lead to the lack of, that will lead to them becoming the part of apathy. They will be very much apathetic because they are not motivated or encouraged or appreciated for the great job they are doing. So public servants find themselves being the part of apathy because there's a lack of motivation in the public sector. There are no incentives that are given to them as a part of appreciation. So public servants are rarely acknowledged or appreciated and rewarded for their hard work and extra effort by the public sector. The public sector tends to be more emphatic on penalties for misconduct rather than setting principles that acknowledge the extra effort by the public servants. This reduces the level of commitment and promotes self-interest, which has an effect of corruption. Remember, once public servants lack motivation, corruption will be increasing, and then also there will be theft, there will be apathy within that public sector, so that lead to the inefficient provision of public goods and services. Some departments manage to provide services under these conditions, but services remain limited, low in quality and high in cost, because they are not highly appreciated for the great job they are doing for the society. The special interest groups. So enterprises or unions and individuals who try to further their own interests by means of rent seeking. That's when now there must be compromise so that they can benefit. These are powerful and influential groups with the strength to manipulate government's decision making based on income and expenditure. There can be easily diversion of money or expenditure to favor them, because they can threaten the government to embark into strike, which can lead to maybe the downfall of the economy. Then the government will always favor them. So they make use of law, lobbying, bribes, and kickbacks, and other favors to influence government officials to act in their interest. Special interest groups include Association of Farmers, Chamber of Commerce, trade unions, politicians, etc. They are very much powerful to influence government decision making, which will favor them at the expense of the society, and we call that a rent seeking. We continue. They benefit through profitable contracts, favorable regulations, direct subsidies, special tax treatment, and special import tariffs or quotas. Because of their power to manipulate the government, these are most of their benefits. Groups such as labor unions and business groups can also influence government to distribute resources in such a way that they benefit at the expense of the rest of the country. We call that the Pareto inefficiency, because they will be made better while their government is making others worse off. This results to public resources being channeled to one group while the majority remain unconsidered and ignored in the economy. The structural weaknesses. The use of conflicting ideas and policies weakens framework and effort of the long-term plan for the government. Whenever officials are conflicted in there, they will be using what we call policies that are working against each other, which will be disturbing the delivery of public services. Structural failure in the economy results to government failure to achieve its macroeconomic objectives. Whenever there is structural failure, if structure is very, very weak in the office, it is impossible for the state to achieve its public sector objectives. It is impossible to provide for needs of all unemployed and poor people with limited resources. Some objectives might also work against each other. For example, when the government redistributes income too aggressively, economic growth and development could suffer in the long term. And then we have politicians here. So if politicians are not held accountable for their decision on income and expenditure, public funds are used inefficiently, and they are also used for personal gain. And then the accountability procedure involves transparency and participation, like it was mentioned before. And then redeployment of politicians in position result to incompetence and inability to deliver services, because they lack relevant skills and expertise or knowledge. If ever politicians are being redeployed from one department to another, that will always result to inefficiency, because as a person or that human resource leave from one department to another, that person have to adapt in there. As the person have to adapt, that will be taking a long period of time, and they become incompetent and they lack knowledge. That will lead to poor service delivery. So that's an issue also. Politicians can increase government spending through lobbying and rent seeking as they campaign for being elected. But after that, they disappear. As they disappear, they come back after 5 years when they want to be voted for again. Those whose aim to be re-elected and who pay to vote maximizing strategies to secure or retain their political positions. Such politicians have a short-term horizon which is limited to the date of the next election. So whenever they plan before elections and they plan immediately when other elections are coming. After election they disappear, they come back again. So politicians are a problem. They can even increase government spending for the sake of buying votes because they want to be elected. After that, they disappear. This means that they promote policies and spend money on project as long as they can get votes. So they don't have a long-term plan, but they have a short-term plan, which is very much around to the date of elections. These policies might involve an inefficient allocation of resources because they want to get the results now. So they will be overspending now, which will lead to inefficiency. And then in future, there is no money available to fund the community projects. And then what are the effects of the public sector failure? After the public sector has failed, there will be inefficient allocation of resources, there will be economic instability, there will be social instability, and then distribution of income will also be unfair. Then let's check. Inefficient allocation of resources. The public sector is supposed to ensure the optimal allocation of resources because the market provision incompatibility of some goods, such as public goods and merit goods. Then in the event of public sector failure, optimal allocation of resources is not possible or achieved. Resources and taxpayers' money is wasted. Services will not be delivered, and people tend to be to illegal practices such as illegal electricity connections and land invasions if ever public sector is failing. Economic instability. One of the macroeconomic objective or public sector objective is if the public sector is to ensure economic stability. So public sector has to ensure that there is a what we call economic stability. So it uses fiscal and monetary policies to achieve stability as to prices, balance of payments, employment, and interest rate. Failure undermines economic confidence and therefore foreign investors if ever the state fails to ensure economic stability. Failure means such stability would not be achieved. And then we continue with social instability. The public sector is supposed to ensure that social stability by providing services such as sanitation, clean water, energy, street light protection, roads, cash grants, and a healthy environment. If the state fails to provide this, it will lead to social instability because there will be a high level of poverty, high level of crime, and also social protests will always be there. And then if it fails, the lives of people are destabilized and their human rights will be compromised or violated by the government if ever the government does not provide what is their rights according to the constitution. It leads to the community conflict. Violence can occur in a form of protest. Then we continue distribution of income. The public sector uses progressive tax system whereby high income earners are being taxed more so that the income can be distributed. If it fails to achieve this objective, income remains unequally, and then some people will be under severe poverty while other people are living above poverty line. Others will be in the higher class. The rich will get richer and poor will be getting poor because government is failing to redistribute income fair within the society. Poverty and unemployment will be rising because of the failure of the government. And then the next is the assessment, the very short one. Let's check. We are given the South Africa's tax tables for 2023-2024. And then this is a tax rate of 18% at this amount, and then it increases until it reaches 45% like on the previous table. So let's check. What are the questions? Identify the marginal tax rate for a person earning between 641,401 and 817,600. That is 39%. And then name the income tax system represented by the above table. That's a progressive tax system which occurs when high income earners are taxed more than low income earners. Briefly describe the term fiscal policy. So that action taken by the government in respect of taxation and government spending and borrowing in order to influence the economic activity. Explain the effect of high tax rate on taxpayers in the economy. People will be discouraged to work and they will leave the labor market. That can even lead to what we call the tax evasion by businesses. Businesses may be discouraged to produce and they will shut down. Businesses and individuals may evade or avoid paying tax. Use the information in the table above to calculate the amount of income tax payable if one receives annual income tax of 300,000. Show all calculations. So here we will be saying 40,680 plus 26% of taxable income above, which is above 226,000. So 40,780 plus 26%, then that's why we say multiplied by 300,000 minus 226 in bracket, and then 40,680 plus 26% multiplied by 74,000, and then 40,780 plus 19,240, which give us 59,920. That was for 4 marks. So all in all, his data response is 10 marks. And then example of paragraph question: explain the relationship between tax rate and tax revenues with the age of the graph. That means you will have to draw the graph and explain the relationship using the Laffer curve in there. So it will be redrawn again like it was redrawn before. So it comes back as it is with the same explanation. So let's see the connection in there of our Laffer curve. And then we have our point in there as for revenues and what we call tax rates, point A, point B, and point C. Then we have apex indicated 6%, and then we have our Laffer curve in there. Let's see the explanation of this curve, like it was done even before. Remember, this is a paragraph question of Middle order. Laffer curve explain the relationship between tax rate and tax revenues for 2 marks. If tax rate is 10%, tax revenue will be 60 million indicated by letter A, which means that lower tax rate prevents state from maximizing its tax revenues. The tax rate of 40% result to government maximizing its tax revenues at point B, which is the apex. And then we continue. The further increase in tax rate to 60% result to the decline in tax revenues to 60 million indicated by point C on our Laffer curve. Tax evasion and tax avoidance will occur in this case when taxpayers find tax revenue being a great burden, then they will start not to pay tax. If tax rate is 100%, that will mean tax revenue will be equal to 0. The graph is for 4 marks, and also explanation will be for 4 marks. Also the example: how can the management failure lead to the poor performance of state-owned enterprises? If ever there's a management failure in those state-owned enterprises. Let's check this for 8 marks. Ignorance by applying conflicting policies or getting the timing of policy changes wrong causes the current economic situation to be even worse, to worsen. Lack of leadership is evident in poor quality and expensive services due to state-owned enterprises that are inefficient and ineffective. Government officials lack training experience that lead to wrong decision and low productivity, intensified by funds not approved or spent. And then we continue. Management in SOEs serve their own interests through corruption, personal and hidden agendas, and suspicious personal motives. Questionable motives like allowing rent-seeking, where decision-making improve the welfare of someone at the expense of the welfare of the society or others, e.g. providing certain individual or group with profitable contracts and favorable regulations at the expense of other people in the society. So those were some questions. I thank you, and I believe this lesson will have great impact as you prepare to complete your public sector as topic number 3. Our next topic that will be covered next week, Friday, is a part of the international trade, which is a very interesting and economical topic. I wish you all the best. Thank you.